Yep. So I decided to to pop in 2 minutes earlier, just to show you guys my wonderful kitchen and background. It's nice to see some activity in the comments already, but I'll just wait 2 minutes before we kick off. Who else is excited for what's to come? Yeah, thanks, Kobe. Yeah, I try to keep it beautiful, I would say. Hi, Terry. How you doing? Hi, Shuaib. Yeah, I collect all that wine whenever I travel. So there's one from just about, yeah, each country I've been to this year, I would say. Okay. And hi, Izinde. Hi, Jade. We should be we should be kicking off any moment from now. I want this to be as interactive as possible. So I would be peeking in the comments every now and I would, take any questions as they come or whenever I'm able to pause. So this is going to be interesting as I wouldn't have any slides personally, but I think occasionally I would share my screen if there's any relevant information. Yeah, as many likes as you can imagine, Mariah. Okay, we can kick off just for the sake of time, so we have enough time. Welcome everyone to this live stream, and I am William. I am the founder of Hackmamba, and Hackmamba is a technical content agency, and we work with lean software teams to create technical content. You're welcome to the first stream of this hackathon, and this is a content hackathon. If you haven't been a part of this, we typically build cool stuff. We write about them, and just like every other competition, there is the potential for you to win. Um, so just a little bit more about myself. Like I said, I'm the founder of Hackmamba, and I'm also a product manager, a software engineer, and a developer advocate on my off days. For today, I would introduce the hackathon, just cover some ground, and then I would go over the first topic today, which is how to create effective technical content. For those that are new to content writing, I think this will benefit you. And if you are already, you're a prolific technical writer, I think you can also benefit from this as I would be sharing some expert tips from my time as a technical writer. Also, after I'm done speaking, we will have Kobe from Cloudinary, the amazing Kobe. If you do not already know him, just go to Twitter and type Kobe. You'll find him. Kobe Fayok. He's going to talk to you about optimizing media in Jamstack applications. And after that, we would conclude the sessions for today until tomorrow. You can also find Kobe hanging out in the chat here. So if you have any questions, you can ask him. I would also like to ask you all to, share probably on Twitter about the hackathon. We do this to motivate others to, to join in the stream, to come in and learn. Also, for those that haven't joined Discord, they can join in and network with other members of the community. You can use the hashtag Jamstack Hack. This way we see your tweets and we can retweet them as well. If you also tag the sponsors of this event, that would be great. So Cloudinary, Uniform, Netlify, and Xata. I would share more information about the sponsors in time. So with that aside, why did we decide to come up with a hackathon like this? Why did we go this route? We wanted to make impact at scale. That's the simplest way to put it. We could, let everyone go on, build stuff, and that would just be it, just like a regular hackathon. But we wanted you to have something to put in your portfolios. We wanted to have proof. And with content, that's just about a lot of proof on the internet. And from the last edition, we've seen the content created get over 30,000 views. And we've had people that participated in the hackathon go on to get jobs, to, work on open source projects, become even better engineers and technical writers. So we decided to throw, another party, in this case, the hackathon. That's why we decided to start with the hackathon. And for those of you that do not know what the Jamstack is and why we decided to frame this around the Jamstack. So the Jamstack is basically an architecture or a way of building software that lets you decouple your business and your data from your front end. If that sounds too complex, just think about when you use React.js or Gatsby or Nox or any of the cool front end, you know, um, frameworks and tools to build websites and web applications. These web applications can stand, the interface can stay apart from the business logic and the data. And this data can come from third-party APIs and services. All these contribute to building a modern, scalable, and secure web application. So for this hackathon, since it's Jamstack focused, we would also be building products and features following the same pattern. So you would build products using Cloudinary, using Xata as a database provider, and you would deploy that to Netlify. You can also employ any other tool or technology you fancy. You could pull in an authentication service. You could pull in, say, an audio service, an artificial intelligence service. You could write your own cloud service that exposes APIs, and you use them in your Jamstack application. You can check out jamstack.org for more information on what the Jamstack is. This hackathon would start tomorrow officially. Today and tomorrow, part of tomorrow, we will be having workshop sessions where we will talk about technical writing. We will talk about building scalable Jamstack applications, and we would talk about a topic I'm really interested in, which is how to stay consistent as a technical writer. How do you find topics? How do you stay motivated to keep writing? I would be speaking with Colby on the live stream tomorrow about that as well. In the hackathon, you would create content. There are facilitators that will, ensure you get the right resources. And after you create the content, they would also help with like reviewing the content to make sure it's top notch. This way, when you publish it, you have, credible content you could add to either your portfolio, or you could share it with anyone. And one thing I like about creating content is once you hit the publish button, there is a high chance that there is at least one person out there that would benefit from the content you created. So we should expect that. The hackathon would run from tomorrow, the 21st, until the 4th of November. This is to give us ample time to create and to write, to do some research if we have to create like really good work. We could, go on to write one content piece at that time, or we write even multiple. We expect that the content you would create would be of great quality. Do not worry, we will help you facilitate that. And there isn't any bad content, right? So whatever you write, definitely, it can get better. The only requirement for the hackathon is when you build and when you eventually write, to win, you would have to use Cloudinary and Xata. That's the only requirement we have for this Jamstack hackathon. Aside that, you can put in any other um, software provider you want. And if you're not in the Jamstack space, like I know I've seen a lot of people from the community that are Pythonistas or they are into machine learning, you can also participate. You could learn from today. You could also write. Um, but following the rules of the hackathon, you probably wouldn't be eligible to win if you write like a solely backend focused tutorial. But last time we had people that also learned to write React applications, that learned to write Vue.js front end to power whatever backend service they wrote. So this could be opportunity to give this a shot. We also will have a document that contains, we'll share this after now, that contains ideas and sample features and products you could look to build in different spaces. The code you would create will be pushed to GitHub as they will be assessed. That's also a criteria for winning the hackathon is we would have to judge both the code and the content. And the code as well would need to be hosted, so it has to be deployed. We would need to test it. We will need to test whichever product or feature you're going to be building. We created a Discord server for you all to network. As part of this event, you get to meet other peers in the hackathon. You get to learn from them. We have placed everyone in a group. So as a group, you can collaborate on on stuff you're building. You can collaborate on whatever technology. You can ask questions, but eventually you will be judged, or your content and code will be judged singularly. Right. So we try to foster collaboration in this group. So if you haven't gotten into a group, you can send us an email on buddy@hackmamba.io, and we'll be sure to find your group and send you an email regarding that. We would also reward the top Discord channels with engaging participants. A note on the sponsors. I would just share my screen. 1 second. Yeah, so I just put this together. Um, on the sponsors, we have Cloudinary, Xata, Netlify, and Uniform. So Cloudinary is a service that provides developers with powerful APIs to manage media in Jamstack applications. Xata provides a service, like I said, a Jamstack service to that lets you add a serverless database or power your application with next generation. What's the buzzword to use now? But a modern, database to use. It provides a lot of features. It's feature rich, so you should check them out. You will be building with Xata and Cloudinary. Netlify, if you already do not know, is a platform that lets you build and deploy your application. So Netlify supports you all the way from defining your solution to building it and shipping that. You can do that on Netlify. Uniform is a developer experience platform, or I would say more recently, a digital experience composition platform or service that lets you build websites and applications with data from multiple sources. And while you're at it, it also empowers non-developers or content practitioners, business users to manage the data of your site, leaving you as a developer with the ability to just code, to do what you love. And obviously, there's Hackmamba, the cool kid, just down there. Hackmamba, like I said earlier, we help lean teams create content. So if you would go on Twitter, these are the Twitter handles of the different sponsors. Tweet at them, let them know we appreciate them sponsoring an effort, like this. That would be lovely. So without further ado, yeah, I see one more question just before I move forward is from Esther. She says, can a product manager with no background in coding participate in this? So both yes and no. Um, on yes, after now, I would be talking about creating technical content, and this applies to just about anyone. You can apply that to product management, to design, to software engineering, and that works. To win the hackathon, however, you would need to be a developer. So you would need to be able to build Jamstack applications, and we would judge you based on that application. So yes, you would need to code, but to participate, to learn, to network with others, you do not need to know how to code to do those. I hope that answers your question, Esther. So without taking too much time, I think we're right on track with introducing the event. And I look forward to seeing your tweets mentioning the sponsors as well as Hackathon, and also your overall thought on the event. As this event is on YouTube, we would record this as well and later share it via Discord and also in your emails. So if you're unable to make it at this time, that's also fine. You can watch this later. But there's going to be loads of information, and I will be able to take your questions live if you're here. So, moving into the first talk of the day, this is on writing effective technical content. I refuse to share slides because I want this to be as interactive as possible, and I would go over my process, how I have created content that's reached hundreds of thousands, probably up to a million people. I'll cut myself some slack at this point. How I've been able to create effective content that's reached people, and also what we do at Hackmamba, the process we take to create effective technical content. And by effective, I mean content that meets desired outcomes that we set. I probably would make this talk into a long form article so you can read it and reference it over time. But starting with, the first thing we do when we want to create content is we look at why. We ask ourselves, why do we want to write this article? What's the desired outcome? Do we want to educate people on how to use a specific feature? Do we want to write a tutorial of how to do ABC with XYZ? Right? So why do we want to write this? And better put, we articulate the outcome of this. And we typically would write at the end of the day or after reading this article, we want the user to be able to do this. We want the user to be able to upload images to Cloudinary. That's an outcome. That's why. After we've defined why, we go into defining who. So who is this for? Is this for a beginner? Is this for someone with experience in JavaScript, right? We start to think about like the language. We want to model the ideal user. Is this an experienced user? Is this an engineer? Is this a product manager? Right? Once we've clearly articulated why and who, and we do this for every piece of content, we go into how. Now, how is this is the body of work. This is where you get to writing. Remember, we start with why, we start with who, and these help us define how. And the first step when defining how is we have to do some research. So when you're writing, people expect you to be a subject matter expert. Actually, you should be someone with authority, And by authority, I do not mean you have to be very experienced, like an experienced engineer. You could be writing about HTML and you've written HTML for the last 1 year consistently every day. That gives you some authority, right? So you could need to do some research if there are some gaps in your knowledge. After that, after doing some research and gathering information, credible information, because you can find a lot of unuseful stuff on the internet, you would get to the title. This is where a lot of people get it wrong. They just put about any title, but there's a system to coming up with a title. And the first thing you would have to note is your title has to be short. You will want to, the rule of thumb for me is I look at a I look at Google, right? I think on average, how many words do I need to see on the title of of an article to that would either catch my attention and also that would fit within the screen, right? So I would say you keep your title as short as possible, right? The shorter, the better. Next, you want your title to be easy to recognize, right? So you don't want people, breaking their head trying to figure out what exactly does this title say. If you share it on Twitter, you want people to see the title and go like, oh yeah, I know what this article could talk about, right? Another thing you could do is you could make it catchy. This depends on your intention as well. You know, you could phrase your title in such a way if someone sees it, they like want to try it out, they want to read this post, they want to check it out. um Another tip on titles is you want to try to guess what a user will search for. I haven't shared this with anyone before. Now I'm sharing this here. So you will want to find out, as a developer, when I go on Google or I go on Stack Overflow, what would I search for when I have a specific problem, or when I have this problem that you've defined an outcome for. So using the example of I want to upload an image to Cloudinary, as a developer or as a user that I have defined, what would I search for? Typically, I would search for how to upload an image to Cloudinary. That's a very good title. If that's your outcome, you should make that your title. You shouldn't make it uploading images to Cloudinary with, or just try to make it match, closely with what a developer um, or what your user has or would search for. Lastly, with selecting titles, you shouldn't be afraid if someone has written a particular article or a particular title about a particular problem before. Every day, new ways arise to solve the same problem. And if that helps, in JavaScript, there are new versions of a particular tool that come up just about every other week, right? And so, Google also highlights the most recent solution to a problem or the most recent content that's written for certain keywords. So if you see an article that was written 5 years ago, yes, fine, you can write your own opinion. You can use like even better technology to create that content, and that should reflect also in the title. So after writing out the title, the next thing you would want to do is you get to the outline. The outline pretty much is a blueprint of your content. It gives you direction, right? It's kind of the North Star for your content. You would want this title to be as chronological as possible and follow logical steps, right? So by that, I mean you would want to start with an introduction and you would want to end with a conclusion. And if it's a tutorial, you would want to structure the outline in such a way that if someone were to follow this one step, after the other, they would arrive at the same conclusion as you. They wouldn't follow it. When they follow your content, you don't want them to, hit their head on the wall and ask, what have I done? Or how does this even work? Right? So the outline should also be chronological and follow, logical steps. I believe every content piece, every outline should have an introduction, a body, and a summary. The introduction introduces you or tells a very short story of the content, whereas the summary recaps everything that's been thought in the blog post. And yeah, just to recap, this applies to blog posts. So moving on from the outline, the next thing you would want to complete is the code. So in this case, the product or the feature that you're building. Here, you're expected to be an engineer. So if you're writing a technical blog post, you would either want to build a demo that's on GitHub, or you would want to use a web-based IDE like Code Sandbox or Stack Blitz. But you would, create the code. You would want it to be clear. You would want to put as much comments as possible, because someone entirely new on the internet will be looking at your code, right? So once you've created the code, you've written the code should also match your outline, right? So in the code, if you say imported a module and then later you defined, say, the HTML content, you would want, your content outline to follow the same structure. If say in the example of uploading an image to Cloudinary, if your first step is to find the image, right? Find the image where it's stored locally. And then the second step is to define a function that would upload this image to Cloudinary. Your outline should also follow the same steps, the same way you built the code. Once you've written the code and this is clear, you then move back to the content proper. So now you're armed with, you have your outline, you have the code, you know who you're writing for, and you know what you expect the reader to gain out of this article. Everything already seems complete, right? So at this point, you can go in to create the content. As for the content, you will want to structure your content properly. You would want to make sure there is a good use of white space. You don't want someone to read your content and end up with like brain problems. So you want to structure it properly. You also want to watch the length of your content. As for technical blog posts, you would want to keep the content within from 1,000 words to 1,500, 1,800 words. And this is very important, right? Typically, as developers, when you see a blog post that is 2,500 words or 3,000 words, this is becoming a newspaper. This is becoming a course, right? To find a solution, you would have to most times go through all that. You would need a lot of brain power to figure out where exactly in this long piece of content does your solution live, right? So keep the content as short as possible. And in the case where you're unable to, keep the content really short, maybe think about splitting it into two, having like a part one and a part two, right? Or you can just be very specific with the feature you're describing. Every other thing should either come in a boilerplate code or content you've written previously, and you talk about only the specific feature that you're working on. That way you keep the outcome of that content pretty focused. So next thing after the length is the headings. Two things to note about the headings. In as much as you want the headings to be descriptive, you would want to optimize them for SEO as well. So the headings should also communicate logical problem points, right? Or solution points that a user will want to see, right? So when uploading an image to Cloudinary, for instance, you would want to have a heading for defining prerequisites. So everything you need to install, you need a heading for that. The next heading could be creating a Cloudinary account. And you keep the heading straight to the point as well. You want to have as many headings as there are key points in your article. You don't want to have a blog post that has 3 headings and every other thing is just text. For every sizable chunk of content with a specific context, right? So maybe defining your modules or installing dependencies, you want to have a heading that captures that. As a user or as a reader, when I see an article like this and I scan through it, I can immediately pick out what portion of this article my solution would be in. Yeah, just checking in the comments if there are any questions. But yeah, after the heading, you continue with creating the content. Now you want your content to be as clear as possible, no fluff. You want to go straight to the point. You want to make it coincide, right? No filler words. You construct your sentences as short as possible. So you don't want to have 3 lines of text with commas in between without pause. So you want to write as many short, straight to the point sentences as possible. And a pro tip again is when creating content, you need to find your voice. Now, this is the tricky part when finding your voice. You want to find a balance between your normal informal voice, so how you talk to your friends and your family members, and your professional voice, how you would write a book. You want to strike a balance between those. You don't want to write content that's too informal and uses, everyday your everyday lingo. You want something that's, you know, semi-formal, I would say. That's up to you to find out. You can also read like articles that have been written by other people to see how they do this. Also, this would take practice and writing consistently to figure out. The next thing to consider when creating content is the pronouns you use. So a lot of times I see people create content and they start the tutorial. For instance, they start a tutorial by saying, we do ABC with XYZ. So they refer to themselves as the subject. Whereas some other authors refer to the reader as the subject. So you say something like, you call this function to print or to log the result of the API call, right? You can use one or the other, but not both. So when you're writing, you can say, we will make an API call, or you say, you will make an API call. Not in one part of the article, you say, we do this, and then in another part, you say, you do that. It most times confuses just about any reader. So pick a pronoun. You're either referring to yourself as a subject or you're referring to the reader as a subject. So you use we, our, and never use I. If you're tempted to write I, remove that thought. You use we, you use our, and when you're referring to the reader as the subject, you use you and your. So once you have the pronouns done, another thing to consider is some of the terms, some of the words you use. You can find synonyms for, overly used words. You could just use Google to find synonyms for certain words like create, usual, import. Where it's not required to use a specific word, if you find out that you're overusing a certain word, then just find a synonym for that. Also, never use the word easy. It could be easy for you, but it's not easy for someone else. So most times people are tempted to write, this is easy to do, or it's easy to import this, or it's simple. So easy and simple, no, it's simple to upload an image to Cloudinary. Yeah, I keep using Cloudinary. I just really like them. Yeah, 1 second, sorry. Great. Yeah, so never use the words easy or simple. Once you're done with this. As you progress through the content, there's the need to embed certain other elements. You want to embed code blocks, you want to embed images, you want to embed videos. With the code block, there is also a technique to that. As code blocks are drastically different from text content, they come in chunks, right? And a good rule of thumb is to never let your code block exceed 50 lines of code. If it exceeds 50 lines, you need to split that into two or split that into multiple parts and explain each portion with as much context as possible. And for every code block you write, it should contain context of what the code does, possibly even comments, but try to keep it within 50 lines of code as much as possible. If it has to go beyond 50 lines, what we do at Hackmamba, for instance, is we put it in a GitHub gist. And GitHub gists shouldn't go beyond 100 lines, right? So this is a clear case of where a reader encounters a code block in, while reading through content. It wouldn't make sense if a reader is scanning through, okay, first line, the 20th line, the 50th line, 150, 200. That's already like a blog post on its own. So you want to split the code blocks into chunks as much as possible. Yeah, thanks, Kobe. About still on the code blocks, you should never post screenshots of your code. While you might be tempted to just take a screenshot and put it in the code, this isn't so useful for your reader. Typically, as we know, developers, from going to Stack Overflow every now and then, you want to hit Control C to get lines of code. But if it's a screenshot, you're unable to do that. You would have to look at the code, go and write it, and that's stressful, right? So try as much as possible to use inline embedded code blocks, and almost all tools, even Markdown, natively support inline embedded code blocks. So you want to try that. You want to use that as much as possible. And while you do this, always keep the reader in mind. Remember, if your reader is a beginner, you want to make sure both the code and the content you write matches the reader. So having all this in mind, you've successfully, created the code. It matches the user persona. You have you've written the content, you've added like your embeds, you've added images. Remember, an image is worth 1,000 words. So where you can use images, totally, you should use them. You've written these. The next thing, obviously, is to review this content. And reviews are just as important as actually writing the code. And a couple of things to keep in mind when reviewing content is, one, you want to review it for SEO. You want your content to impact as many people as possible. You want it to reach as many readers as possible. So you want to ensure the title, like I said earlier, is short. The headers communicates the point clearly. The introductory portion of your article talks about the problem that article is trying to solve. So earlier I said the problem here is I want to teach someone how to upload an image to Cloudinary, right? Or I want to teach someone how to retrieve an entry on a database that's on Xata. This should be clearly communicated in the introductory portion. So the introduction could say something like, this post teaches you how to upload an image to Cloudinary, right? When a user reads this, also when it's indexed by Google, that automatically shows up as one of the first texts in the post. So you want to review your post for SEO, and you could Google other SEO tips for your blog posts. A really cool trick I do is with UTM links. So UTM links or UTM parameters are a way for marketing teams and marketing organizations to identify the sources and the mediums of different blog posts or their pages, right? So something I do with UTM links is, if I'm writing, say, a blog post that doesn't concern anybody, but I'm using a relatively, or a tool that the company doesn't know who I am. I'm thinking of some tool. Say I use Auth0, for instance. I would add a UTM campaign parameter that says William's article or iChulo's post. And if for any reason that blog post should get 5,000 views, right? And in the blog post, the readers click on that link to Auth0 that has a UTM parameter with William, the marketing team or the organization, in whatever analytics tool they would use, they would see William's post, or this traffic came from this blog post that was written by this person. And that's how you get like even noticed. That's how they would reach out to you if they weren't aware of your blog post. So try to use UTM parameters as much as possible. You can also Google what UTM parameters mean. After you've reviewed the UTM parameters, something you would want to conduct a personal review, and this is very, very important. So I see a lot of writers and a lot of authors create content, but they just, once they are done, they send it out. Most times when you're done writing and you review your article, that's when you see all the mistakes and everything that, things that you might have missed. And a good way to review a technical blog post is to go through it like a reader. Clear your mind, go through the blog post, try to rebuild the demo you've built solely from the blog post. Assume you do not know anything of the code and just try to rebuild the demo using the content you have created. That would expose, a lot of flaws. And when you do this, if it's a browser-based project, run it in incognito mode. That could expose also a lot of things. Try to run it in the most neutral environment you can find. Yeah. So after a personal review of your code and your content, you want to conduct a grammar review of of your content. And for grammar reviews, typically I rely on tools to do that because I just review them myself. So I would use Grammarly or the Hemingway app. And these are free tools. At least with their free tier, you can get enough value to create a decent post. So I would run an article through Grammarly, and the machine looks over it again and says, "Hey, you've missed this punctuation somewhere, or um, you have a typo here." I then go in to make such changes. The Hemingway app tells you to split sentences and says, "Hey, this sentence is it's too complex, or it's too long. You need to split it so it's more coherent." And lastly, with reviews, I rely heavily on peer reviews. So I get um, I get a lot more people, or I send this content to my friends, my peers, people in the community to say, "Hey, you could just have a look at this content and provide whatsoever review you have." If you know me, you can also send me your articles. I would be happy to have a look at them. Once you're done with the reviews and this is satisfactory, you'll want to get to the next step of creating your content, which is publishing it and distributing it. There are a lot of platforms to publish your content, the content you've created. There's, for developers, I would go with dev.to because they have like very high SEO ranking, or they have really good visibility. They give your post really good visibility. You could use dev.to, you could use Hashnode, you can try Medium, but still not so sure of Medium. And ultimately, you can always grow your own blog. And a good thing about posting on your blog is, after putting content on your blog, you can cross post it on dev.to. Right? You just need to specify, using a canonical URL, you need to specify which version of that content is the original one. This will tell Google what to show users when they enter a search query that closely matches your article. So say I wrote a blog post that describes how to upload an image to Cloudinary, this example blog post I used. I would put it on my blog on Hackmamba, right? And on dev.to, I would post the same article word for word. I wouldn't change anything. But in the settings for the article, you can add a canonical URL. That canonical URL will just be the URL of the post on Hackmamba, right? So dev.to will do their magic, and Hackmamba does their magic as well, right? So that's something you'll want to do. And I really advise people trying to grow their own blog. It's it's a really it's a really good thing to do and provides like really really good credibility on your skills. So uh, part of the things to consider when publishing your blog post is also having a banner image and an open graph image. Most publishing platforms would let you upload a cover image for your blog. And we've seen, or statistically, it's been seen that blog posts that have, a really nice cover image that communicates the content of the blog post gets a lot more clicks. So you want to make sure your blog post contains at least one cover image or contains a cover image. And once you're done publishing this content, you want to share it in communities. You want to share it to people. You want to say, hey, check this blog post out, right? You want it to reach as many people as possible. And lastly, once your blog post is published, yeah, you thought that was it? No, that's not it. There's still one last step is you want to know how successful this blog post is, right? You want to make sure it's getting views, and also you want it to reinforce subsequent blog posts you will create, right? So periodically you should go check up on this, this post you created, see if you're able to see in-depth statistics or analytics on it. You do just that. You want to see the posts that have the most reads. You want to see the posts with the most comments. In the comments, you could find even ideas for the next blog post. So you want to keep an eye on this blog post. And if you would write another blog post, probably the first one would inform the content of the next. And after the success metrics here, you can go buy yourself a drink because you've just written, your first blog post, your first technical blog post. Just to give a quick recap of the steps, I know I just kept on going. If you have a pen, you could write these down now. But first, you would want to, you want to define the outcome for your blog post. You want to define why you're writing it. Next, we said you want to define who you're writing it for, and you want to have that in mind. Next, we talked about how you want to write the blog post, how you want to structure the title, the outline, how you would write the code. And after that, we got to reviewing the content. How do you review your content? What are things to look out for? What tools like Grammarly and Hemingway app you could use, and also how you could utilize peer reviews to improve the quality of your content. Next, we talked about publishing your content, what platforms you want to put them on, which platforms give you the most reach. And lastly, we talked about success metrics for your blog post. And a thing to note is this applies to not just technical blog posts. A lot of it also applies to slightly non-technical blog posts, like a product management blog post. And with the in the hackathon, you would employ this to create blog posts. And if there are any questions, or if you have any questions on each of these steps, we're always going to be on Discord to answer them. And with this in mind, I would just look in the comments if there are any questions here. Um, so while I look for questions, I would bring in Colby. Colby will be talking about optimizing media.
Hello, hello.
Welcome to the stream.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I was just going over the questions here, and I see one from Theodore that says, please, do you have a slide or some notes on what you thought today? Yes, I will make this into like a blog post, or at least I would share this content, and you can always look back to it. Nature asked, how do you check for plagiarism? Yeah, that's a very important important aspect of the content. There are multiple plagiarism, checking tools. A bunch of them are not free, but you could probably find a couple that are good. Personally use Grammarly to check for plagiarism. And a rule of thumb for me is if I create content that comes from, from my mind, there is a high chance that it's not plagiarized, right? So typically there isn't any need for me to check for, plagiarism. But yeah, there are tools out there you can use um, to check for plagiarism. Um, Let me see what other questions are there. So Ezine asked, must I code or be a developer for me to be a technical writer? So it depends again, what are the outcomes of the content you want to create, right? But typically you would need to understand the concepts that you're going to teach, right? You would need to have a firm grasp of them before you can write. Let me see what other comments. I still have like 11 minutes. Yeah, I'm glad you're learning a lot. Wendu. Yeah, Kobe's setup is really cool. It's unlike my kitchen. It has like the really nice setup.
I'm telling you,
Anyways,
you have a really nice kitchen.
thanks, man. We have Colby here. I'm going to be hanging out on Discord. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. We will have a recording of these sessions also on YouTube. And if you're unable to find me on Discord, you can always reach me on Twitter at iChulo, ICHULOO. And I'll leave the stage for Colby and also hang out in the comments. Over to you, Colby.
Awesome. Would you mind pulling up my slides? I don't think I can pull those up.
Yeah, here you
Awesome.
go.
There we go. Cool. Well, hey, everybody. We're going to talk about how we can optimize our media in Jamstack applications. And I'm going to try to keep my comments open for YouTube. So feel free to jump right in. I'm going to kind of treat it like a normal talk, but I'd be happy to try to answer any questions in line or at the end, whatever works best for you all. So who am I? I'm Colby Fayok. I'm the one hugging BB-8 and Kylo Ren over there. I help others get the tech out of the way to solve real problems with the web. I create educational content over on YouTube, or rather here on YouTube, and on spacejelly.dev. And I also work with the dev community as a developer experience engineer at Cloudinary. You can find me pretty much anywhere on the web by just Googling my name, as I'm the only one in the world. So we're going to take a look at a few examples of media and everyday websites where we start off with Amazon, the king of e-commerce, where they use images to showcase available products and categories. Here we have Star Cadet, where I'm a big fan of their Final Space merch. Hashtag renew Final Space. Any fans out there? Well, they take advantage of GIFs to display video-like product and category images. It's a little bit more of a creative approach, taking a typically very static medium and making it very exciting. Or NASA, exploring places that are out of this world, where we get some really cool high resolution imagery straight from space. And sorry if you hear the banging in the background, we're getting our floor redone, so I have the door closed. Anyways, we can even see that some of this imagery is moving where they're taking different perspectives to try to give us a more interesting look at places like Mars, which is mind blowing. But we also have stuff that is fun like Giphy, where we can share reactions with animated GIFs. Now, as you might imagine, given this talk, we're going to be focusing on the media part of these websites, or images and video. And let's not forget about our audio friend that often gets left out in the media discussions. While it's awesome to be able to enjoy some large images and GIFs on site, it does come with a cost, which is how we're going to talk about it here. And what can we do to help reduce that cost? But you might be wondering, where does media fit into my application? Everywhere, of course. It's part of the web. Whether it's a simple profile avatar, an embedded video, or interactive experience, you're likely using media in some kind of way. But we're going to talk about how it fits into the Jamstack. So let's see how it fits in there. Starting off with your web app, we have some crucial components, like the page itself, which ultimately is HTML rendered in the browser, that might or might not be built with a framework, like one of the Hackmamba sponsors, Gatsby. But then we need to likely bring in some kind of dynamic data. While we could use SSR, we want to deploy these pages statically to reduce overhead and improve performance. So we can make those API requests in the browser, hydrating anything personalized for our visitors. And then we have our media, which plays an important role in providing the visual context, helping people better understand what you're talking about or what you're trying to sell. But it's also a way to be creative, creating an engaging experience rather than just a bunch of text on a page. But okay, that's pretty basic. I've seen images and videos on a page before. Why should I care? This is where we come back to the cost that we talked about earlier. Let's take e-commerce, for example, which is one of my favorite types of websites to kind of work with in the web development world. If you're not familiar, conversion rate is the percentage of your traffic that actually buys something. There are a ton of studies on how website speed directly correlates to conversion rate. eBay, for instance, found a 0.5% increase in their conversion rate with a 100 millisecond load time improvement. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but eBay's worth over $10 billion. So just as an example, 0.5% of that 1 billion is 5 million. So while we might not all be billionaires, it adds up pretty quickly. That means that while all of our video and imagery might help build out a great user experience, that media is going to take up a vast majority of the size of the page. So if we don't pay attention to how we're delivering it, we're going to bloat our pages and destroy that conversion rate. So what can we do to help optimize that delivery? Well, let's start by looking at some examples of images. To start off, while JPEG is a great option, there's a lot more modern formats that we can use to help deliver high quality images at reduced sizes. WebP and AVIF are two of those great options, and depending on the image, can bring some drastic reductions in size. We can also compress our images to the point where we're not impacting the visual quality. Maybe it won't matter for this tiny little thumbnail, but we've learned we want to display these images nice and big, right? So we want them displayed in all their beautiful glory. So letting tech automatically decide how much to optimize helps us as much as we can without noticing a visual difference. We're not over optimizing, but we're also not wasting precious kilobytes in size. If you're working with high quality imagery, your source files might be huge. If you serve them as is, the browser has to resize those images down anyway. So you're just wasting bandwidth. Resize to the sizes you need. And don't try to crunch the image just to get a smaller file size. You'll end up with a super blurry or pixelated image. Modern image delivery can give you the exact size you need on the fly, so take advantage of that. But bringing this all together, we have some pretty amazing results. Using modern formats, letting tech handle automatically optimize our images, and serving the image in the sizes that make sense for our web app, we were able to slash this particular example down from 4.3 megabytes to 51.2 kilobytes, all without sacrificing quality. So hopefully I've convinced you by now that this is pretty important, right? But how can we work with media in our Jamstack application, improving our developer experience and ultimately delivering better experiences to our visitors? This shouldn't be new to anybody, but regardless of which framework you use, except Next.js, who yells at you in your linter, you can use the HTML image tag, importantly, including a width, height, and alt, in addition to the location of the image. Not too different is the basic video tag, which has a lot more options we can get into, but ultimately you need your source and a width and a height. The more interesting thing is sourcing the images and videos. This could come from a variety of sources, like a headless CMS, or a database like Xata. Maybe all your data is pulled in together with a uniform. But ultimately, the image and the video tags you're using dynamically get their sources from this data. Where now, maybe those images and videos are wrapped in a component. This is JSX, which you might be familiar in the React world. We're passing that data right into our image and video tags. But when does this happen? What's actually connecting the dots? This is where we start to think about the framework, where we have a ton of options available to use. And it doesn't have to be a big fancy framework. We don't need to ship a huge bundle of JavaScript every time, especially if we're just dumping static data. But we start to see the higher level flow where we have the location, we're storing the media references, we have the framework that's doing the hard work of pulling all that data into the application, then ultimately using the HTML we know and love to take that data and put it on a page. Now, this is a pretty linear solution, but it's only one of the solutions. We could alternatively build our site using local files from our project. We don't necessarily need a database to do that. But then once we deploy to Netlify, we can install the Cloudinary plugin for Netlify, which automatically will upload all those images at build time and optimize it on delivery. Or we can even orchestrate whatever external data we have, whether it's Cloudinary and Xata, or another 5 services that you love working with, pulling it all together inside a uniform and having a singular connector into the framework of our choice. But the point is, we have a lot of options for how we can pull this all together depending on our needs. So, moving on from actually embedding our images and videos, we start to think about other situations where we need to work with media, such as performing work typically done on a server. And while that's fine, there's another paradigm that kind of fits really well with the Jamstack mentality called serverless. Particularly, we're going to use serverless functions, which is going to be the place where we do our media management work. You don't have to use serverless functions, but it's a really great way to build scalable APIs. So let's just briefly recap what are serverless functions. Well, you can really think of it like any kind of function that you would write in your code. You have your optional input and your output. You can also perform any kind of side effects you want as long as it fits within the environment and time limits. Ultimately, you just need to be able to perform some kind of response by firing the callback and basically declaring if it was successful or not. We have a lot of options for how we can deploy this function. Using typical cloud services like AWS, GCP, or Azure, we can deploy our functions and set up services to invoke those functions. But usually this is set up to work alongside of an endpoint, where the endpoint would actually hit this function. And usually you need to set this up manually when directly using services like AWS. But what I find more interesting, or at least an easier route, are services like Netlify and Vercel that abstract that away from actually needing people to manage all those different pieces. All you need to do is set up a function in your code and inside of a file, and they deploy the rest. We can very easily scaffold these new functions by simply creating a file in our project inside of the right directory. By default, you can add your files to an API folder. The default folder varies by platforms, but then we can use the file-based routing, which makes the function available at /API than your file name. So in this example we have on my screen, if I have my function.js inside of my API folder, this is going to be available at mydomain.com / your provider's API route / my function. At this point, I can really do whatever I want inside the function as long as it's within the scope of those resources available. So here, I'm just simply passing back a message that says hello world. Now, I'm a big fan of Next.js, which provides serverless APIs as part of its toolset. If you're deploying to places like Netlify, you're really doing the same thing. The biggest difference is where the files are located, where in a Next.js project, it will be available in pages /API. Now, if you prefer, you could just as easily move that to a folder configured for your favorite platform, like the API folder. You would then just need to use the platform CLI or local development instead of the Next.js workflow. And how you reference the API might differ a little bit, but given that it's not fully integrated, but ultimately, either way, you're deploying a serverless function as an API to that platform. So now let's talk about how we're actually managing our media inside those serverless functions. Most serverless providers support a few different runtimes, including Node.js, Go, Python, and Ruby. But given we're in the JavaScript world here, we can stick with Node.js, where we can start to think about how we can use the Cloudinary Node SDK to perform custom actions. And just to quickly note, if you do prefer some of those other runtimes to build your APIs, Cloudinary has a few SDKs for those languages that do include Ruby, Python, and Go. But back to Node, we can start to import our Cloudinary module. We can configure our account by specifying our cloud name, where then we have full access to do whatever we want. We're simply generating a URL by passing in our public ID. But this can start to be handy when we're doing this programmatically, or more so when we need to make secure requests that require sensitive information that we don't want inside of our client. That's where using serverless functions really shine in the stack, where we can configure our API keys and our secrets for our Cloudinary account. allowing us to make signed uploads or perform any kind of action that requires authentication. Like here, I'm taking image data that was posted to this endpoint and I'm passing it right into the Cloudinary uploader, returning the results of that upload, and essentially creating a secure proxy that I can now use within my application. As another quick aside, if you're wondering about the security around this thing, by default, the functions do not add course headers, meaning you cannot make cross origin requests. That said, you want to make sure that your requests are only being made from an app level if they have the ability to do so, such as having an authentication layer that checks that it's an authenticated session. Now, just to visualize this a bit before we move on, we're starting off in our Next.js application, or really whatever application that supports functions, where for all intents and purposes, this is a React app once it hits the client. Inside this app, we can make client-side requests to our endpoint, which is where our serverless function comes in, where it will execute that serverless function we built, running anything we include inside, like running our Cloudinary SDK, where we can upload, manage resources, or really do whatever we want. Once our tasks are complete, our endpoint returns a response, including an HTTP code describing whether or not it was successful, which lets our Next.js application handle that response client side, continuing on with whatever action our visitor was performing inside the application. But now we can actually take that to another level, where utilizing Cloudinary, we can get a lot more features available to us on top of a simple upload. For instance, maybe we want to customize our upload parameters, such as self-generating a public ID if I'm using my own convention, and providing tags so that I have a sane way of finding the images I want out of thousands. You can even set custom access controls requiring usage of images to provide an authenticated token, along with a variety of analysis options to take a deeper look at your media. But we're going to look at an example of how we can utilize add-ons that extend the capabilities of Cloudinary. Here in this snippet that I'm showing, we're looking at two different examples of add-ons that we can use: removing the background of images with Cloudinary AI and auto-tagging with Google. First, using AI background removal, when uploading an image to Cloudinary with background removal enabled, Cloudinary is going to kick off a process that uses AI to intelligently remove the background. Once that's complete, you can set up a notification endpoint to trigger the next steps, or you could pull the resource until you see the completed status in the response. And while Keanu works really well as a model, this becomes more interesting in other use cases like e-commerce, where taking a single well-photographed product, we can change the backdrop in which it's presented, whether that's a simple background color to match our UI, or if we wanted to put it in an environment that's completely out of this world. We can also use the Google Auto Tagging add-on, which has a version available both for images and videos that lets us process our images using Google's Vision AI to automatically add tags to all of our images. This becomes critical when managing huge libraries of images, where it can quickly become very difficult to find specific images that you have nothing to search on. Or applying this to applications, maybe you want to give your visitors a way to search for their own media or show related media based off of what they're currently looking at. Tagging can eat up a ton of resources if you're trying to do this manually, where you can get a pretty quick win by enabling this add-on. But pulling this all together, we can provide a wide variety of capabilities and controls to customize our uploads to work exactly how we want them. So what does this look like in a real-world application? Well, if you've been to any of the dev conferences in the past couple of years, such as this one, but there's a chance that Cloudinary was sponsoring. If the event was actually in person, we typically have a booth. But we wanted to do something a bit more interesting than myself and a few of us others sitting behind a table. So we built this app called CloudyCam. While there's a million different applications that we could talk through, I built this app as a way to recreate filter-oriented photo apps like Instagram and Snapchat. The idea being that you can take a picture of yourself with the device's webcam and immediately get access to a wide variety of Cloudinary tech to customize your photos, whether you want to deal with it or pretend you're Darth Vader on what actually does appear to be a moon. While the application might seem like it would involve a lot of complicated features to make it work, really the most complicated part is local state management. Next.js, which is what I used as the portal into React application, makes dealing with the front end really easy, where you could also use Gatsby in a situation like this. But using serverless functions for proxying our media requests, we can let Cloudinary handle a lot of the heavy lifting with its wide feature set. To get started, we want to be able to snag a picture using someone's web device. So I use React Webcam, which allows us to use the native device's browser APIs inside of React. So once we snag the picture, we can set it in state and we can show the still instead of the live feed. At this point, we have raw image data in the browser. Cloudinary really likes raw image data, so we can forward that data right along to our endpoint. In this example, anytime the image variable changes, which is what's storing that data, our useEffect hook fires an asynchronous function. Here, we're using a self-invoking asynchronous function, which then allows us to use the async await syntax, which is just a little bit of a personal preference of mine. You can absolutely just chain a then at the end of that request. But inside, we use the fetch API to post it to our endpoint. Again, passing that raw image data that's stored in state. We'll get to the endpoint here in a second, but we can see that we can then grab the JSON response. Then take those results and use React State to store that data. Which, here's a quick look at what those results actually look like from a Cloudinary upload. Primarily, in our use case, we're interested in the public ID and the secure URL. This gives us our ability to actually reference the image. But if you notice, we're setting those results as our main property. This is to allow us to both source the full image and an image that we can remove the background, having multiple options. So we're going to pull on that thread. We're going to do a very similar thing now, where this time we're waiting for our data to update. Specifically, we're waiting for our main image data to be available. And once it's available, we're going to fire a similar post request, but we're going to do that to our upload endpoint, only this time we're additionally passing some options that we want to this time remove the background like we saw earlier using Cloudinary AI, along with our original Cloudinary upload as the new source. We can simply pass the URL this time, as Cloudinary also likes taking in remote sources. Now, the tricky thing is our response object this time will give us a new image, but our background removal status will only be pending. So we have two options here. Either we can set up a notification URL by creating a new serverless function, which whenever Cloudinary is ready, it'll hit that, or we could pull the resource. In my case, I just use the polling technique from the client. This code would follow immediately after the upload we saw on the previous slide, where we take the resulting image and start to check its status by requesting the resource's details. This happens in a new serverless function specifically made to return a resource's details. With a recursive function, we keep checking again and again to see if it's still pending, but each time we're getting a response that looks similar to our upload response. But this time, we're waiting until we see a status of complete. And once it is complete, we resolve the status check and continue on with updating our local state. And at this point, we have two images upload. Our primary image, which is an upload from our webcam, and we have a transparent version. But now we're interested in adding some effects, the fun part. Where at this point, we can be as creative as we want. We have both the full library of default transformations Cloudinary provides, as well as being able to make up some fun ones of our own, like adding some deal with it classes using Cloudinary face detection. Well, here I'm just using a simple gravity or the focal point. You can take this another step with the advanced facial attributes add-on. Then adding the background from the office. Or scratch that, how about the this is fine meme, where since we have the transparent image, we can just underlay the background right below it. Followed by adding myself in the frame that was on the door and friends. This one was actually a little bit tricky because not only did I need to use face detection for the glasses, I needed to detect the face for the person and then set up the crop of that so that it would be in the center of the frame. But once we have our finished piece of art, we want our visitors to share their creations. The cool thing in Next.js is that it makes it really simple. And while we could use SSR or server-side rendering, we could build this statically and use on-demand generation so that we can make a real-time request to anything that's available inside of our Cloudinary cloud and then build that page. So technically, we could probably send them to our existing public ID, maybe include the transformations as URL parameters, but that turns into one big nasty URL. But given what we just went through, we can just as easily upload our image again and then pass that public ID in the URL, making that share URL much simpler and less prone to break when getting shared. So back inside of our code, we're going to use get static props to statically compile our page. This allows us to grab the parameter and then use the Cloudinary SDK to pass back our resources right away. Now, the tricky thing here is when you use get static props, you're typically mapping out all of your paths using get static paths. Now, Next.js knows the path exists, but we just created that public ID, so we don't even know that it exists yet. But we really don't want to wait until a whole new build is ran to make that available. So instead, we're going to simply say that we don't want to pre-render any paths. And we want to say that our fallback is blocking, meaning that request will fulfill after the new page is generated. This will save us from some build time, but it will also allow us to build that new share page on the fly for our new ID. And fun fact, this will actually happen via on-demand builders using a serverless function if you're using Next.js on Netlify. Now, back to the get static props. This works by using file-based routing, where our file route is a dynamic route. We're saying here with the brackets in our file name, that public ID is going to be our parameter. When Next.js sees that in the URL, it uses it to build our page by passing it our data fetching function, where we can then upload that data. But with that, we have our image, and we can create an experience that makes it fun for people to share the results. So enough at looking at a bunch of pictures. Wink. Let's give in some real code and see how we can make this kind of thing work. We're going to check out some real world benefits of image optimization. It's pretty common for user content or media managed by non-technical people to upload full-sized images without knowing the impact at all. So we can safeguard this by automating optimization of all of our images. Here, we'll check out how we can do that with the Cloudinary Netlify plugin. So I'm going to dive right in. So let me first change this screen that I'm sharing. Oh no, William, if you can promote my screen, gonna have to do it again when I switch back to slides. Thank you. Okay. Here we go. So I created this repository called Astro Image Gallery, which it is what it sounds like. It's an Astro application that's literally just a gallery of images. Now, my goal here will be to show you how we can take these images and optimize them super easily inside of Netlify. So what I did right before this talk, you can see 35 minutes ago, I created a clone of this so that I can use this for my project. So heading over to Netlify, I'm going to go to Add New Site, and I'm going to import this from my GitHub account. So this is just authorizing me for access. And then I'm going to search for Hackmamba. You can see that that's going to pull up my new GitHub repository. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And the nice thing is Netlify is going to detect what kind of project I actually have inside of my repository. And it's going to automatically determine the build settings, or at least it's going to try to determine the build settings. But we can see these are exactly what I need to get started. So literally all I have to do now is click deploy site. Now, if you're not familiar with Netlify or other tools like Vercel or whatever other ones, what's going to happen now is on Netlify's servers, they're going to pull down that project from my GitHub repository. It's going to build that project, and then it's going to deploy all the compiled assets, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from that project, and it's going to deploy it out to the web, where I will have it available at Rainbow Sprinkles. I love their little randomized names. It gets me every time. But this should be pretty quick. I think Astro builds usually pretty quickly. Let's see here. And it's actually done already. 26 seconds. That was pretty nice. But if we open this up in a new tab, we can see just like that, I just deployed a new web app in less than 30 seconds using Netlify. Now, what I want to show you about this is if I open up my network tab, specifically network tab, and I refresh the page, we can see all the images loading here, where these are just random images I grabbed from Unsplash. I just downloaded them from Unsplash, dumped them on the page. And the point is, we don't really know all the time where our images are coming from. Maybe we have an optimization workflow, but maybe we don't. A lot of times, if you have non-technical people working in your content management system, they might not know any better to have to optimize the images. So we might have real results like this, where we have a bunch of JPEGs that are big in size, and all this is going to do is bloat our page, where we can now see that that's taking up 4.5 megabytes in size. That's going to really make it hard for some people to download all these images on their page. So what can we do? Well, as you might imagine, we're going to try to see what we can do with Cloudinary. So inside, I'm going to head over to my site settings and then scroll down where I see plugins on the left. And I'm going to go to the Discover Integrations page. Now, once I'm there, we can see that Cloudinary is right at the top, But if I need to, I can also search for Cloudinary if we become unfeatured at some point. But we can see we have two integrations. We have an API integration, which is something we'll cover on another day, which makes it easier to authenticate with Cloudinary requests. But we also have the Cloudinary plugin, where I'm going to go ahead and click Add Build Plugin. Now this is going to take me back to my site where I can find each site that I want to add it to. And in particular, I want to add it to my Rainbow Sprinkles site. So I'm going to go ahead and click that and click install. And it's now installed on my site. Now I have two more steps. The first one, I need to add an environment variable so it now knows what account to use for Cloudinary, but then I just need to simply redeploy it. But first, let's add that environment variable. So I'm going to head to build and deploy, then the environment section. I'm going to click edit variable names. I'm going to say Cloudinary cloud name, and then I'm going to specify my Cloudinary cloud name. And you can find that right inside of Cloudinary on your dashboard at the top left of the page. So now I'm going to head back up to site overview, and I'm going to go to production deploys and kick off a new build. And what this is going to do this time, we can watch this all unfold. The anticipation is a killer, but we'll be able to see that this time Cloudinary is going to kick in during this build process and do the work that's actually going to make it optimize on the fly. So what it's going to be doing is it's going to be taking all the on-page images in the build artifact. It's going to swap them in with Cloudinary images using automatic optimization, including modern formats and actual compression to a point where it's not going to be visually different. So we can even see that it's loading up the plugin for Cloudinary, and this really shouldn't take too much longer. Like I said, it blows my mind how quick it is with the Astro framework, but we're done already. So I'm going to open that up in a new tab, and I'm going to still keep my other tab open. But if we start to look at this, again, the network tab, and I refresh the page, you wrote down all those file sizes, right? You memorized that already, right? But if you look at the file sizes, first of all, the type, we said they were JPEGs before, right? We're now serving AVIF, which is a more modern format. And we also, if you didn't notice, this file sizes are greatly reduced. So let's just look at what that looks like. So take beach.jpg, for instance. If we look at beach.jpg, that's 125 kilobytes. But if I go back to the other site, that was 566 kilobytes. And we did this all by adding the automatic optimization. This doesn't include things like resizing to only the size we need, because these images are likely pretty huge inside the DOM. So we can even shrink that further. But all we're doing now is just automatically optimizing to make sure that we're delivering the most modern format and compressing it to a point where it's not visually different. But we can see we went from 4.5 megabytes to 1.5 megabytes. That's a huge difference without doing any other optimizations that we could to help load these images faster. Okay, so that's enough of my demo. Let me go back to StreamYard. Okay, Willie, thank you. That was quick. Okay. So just to quickly recap what we saw how we were able to easily optimize all of our on-page images, and we saw how we were able to actually see how that impacts the page load. It was a huge difference, and where we can help deliver better experiences to our visitors. If you want to learn more about how you can work with the Cloudinary Node SDK, the docs have a lot of great examples and everything you need to get started. Or if you head over to spacejelly.dev or my YouTube channel at youtube.com/colbyfayok and search for Cloudinary, I have a ton of use case driven examples, as well as a new repository of straight code examples using Cloudinary in projects. And there's more to come, and I'm also taking a request if you see anything that you'd like to see. And that's it. If you want to learn more chat about this talk, you can, again, find me anywhere at Colby Fayok. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have, whether it's Cloudinary related or not, but we'll see what we can dig into. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Colby, for that. Yeah, that was a really interesting talk with a lot of examples and really cool website. Man, you really do like the coolest stuff. Anyways, I have a question. This one's like my first question, Colby.
Okay.
What's the quickest way to get started with Cloudinary?
So I'd say if you're on a Netlify site, that's totally the quickest way. But usually, not everybody is deployed on Netlify, right? And that also kind of limits the things you can do. So we have the URL Gen SDK, which is the JavaScript client-side SDK, which is really nice for being able to easily just load up your images from Cloudinary or remotely and get it starting in that process.
That's great. That's really good. And is this the fastest way as well to derive value from Cloudinary? Because I know Cloudinary has amazing set of features. I won't lie, I use
Oh,
Cloudinary all the time.
yeah. No, it's interesting because one of the most basic features we have, but I find to be one of the most compelling features, is that automatic optimization, where that's going to make a huge difference, or at least it can make a huge difference in the load time on your pages. Because we're able to serve dynamically the most modern formats depending on the browser, like that can make a huge difference in the user experience.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Also, is Cloudinary just for JavaScript developers? Even though this is
No, no,
Jamstack
no.
Hackathon.
Not at all. So aside languages aside, because I did show that there is a few other SDKs for whatever your favorite language is. Look at that Netlify site, right? Like all I had to do. So if you're whatever type of job you have in the development world, if all you need to do, create a Cloudinary account, grab that cloud name, and install the plugin, which you can do right through the UI, and you have your site is already going to be optimized.
That's fantastic then. I guess the participants already have like some place to start from.
Yeah,
There's a
hopefully that gets
question
started.
here.
I would hope that people go beyond the plugin, but it's definitely an easy way to get that automatic optimization on a site.
Okay, that's great. Someone here has a question that says, can you please explain what upload presets are
Sure. So
in
upload
Cloudinary?
presets are interesting, where what it's going to allow you to do is anytime you upload an image to Cloudinary, you can set a default configuration that's going to say, whenever I upload the photo, I want to do this and this and this and this. And that can include a variety of things. Now, some of the things I like to see are you can include your media analysis, where you can kick off the Google auto tagging to automatically go through your images and then tags. You can set a max width and height so that anytime an image is uploaded, if it's, I don't know, 10,000 kilobytes wide, or not kilobytes, 10,000 pixels wide, you can say, I only want images to be 2,000 pixels wide, and it'll resize everyone down so you don't bloat your storage, right? And those are just two simple examples of, there's a ton of stuff that you can do with it.
That's really cool. I hope that answers your question, Aaron.
Love to see the unapologetic fangirl. Love it.
Yeah, we have a lot of fan people at Hackmamba.
And if you don't have a question now, I'm in the Discord. Feel free to at me. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much, Kobe. And
You're
thanks
quite
for
welcome.
for hopping on the stream. Um, oh, I think there's one more question that says, "What's the best way to set up a notification URL when working with features on Cloudinary that don't give immediate responses?"
Sure, that's a great question. So I honestly haven't worked too much with it, but in my mind, going back to those serverless functions, what I would personally try to do is create a serverless function so that anytime, so when I pass in that notification URL, it's going to be that function, right? And then Cloudinary will hit that URL, which will then allow me to do whatever I want it is within that application.
Yep, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, one more question. I promise this is probably second to the last one. But yeah, I've seen a lot of, you know, AI enthusiasts and engineers on Discord, on the Discord servers. So I wanted to know, what are the different, you know, features of Cloudinary that apply to artificial intelligence and machine learning.
So I don't know quite the whole extensiveness, and I can find out more information if anybody is particularly interested. But two of my favorites are the facial attribute detection and the auto tagging. Now, auto tagging, like I was showing, is you can find, like, I love that it can pick out anything that's in the the image for you or the video for you, and then you have this list of information about what's inside. So while maybe some simple use cases are being able to search on those attributes, think about the data analysis side of that, where you can go through that, and maybe you want to see if you have 1,000 images, how many cats are in those images, right? Like you can do things like that and actually analyze those images.
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. So that's auto tagging.
Yep. The one that I used was Google Auto Tagging, but we also support I think is it AWS recognition, or is it Microsoft recognition? There's a tool called Recognition with a K that we support as well. We
Yeah.
support a few of them.
Yeah, that's cool. I've tried out one, but not extensively. And Aaron has another question that goes: is there a way to upload multiple images to Cloudinary using the Node SDK? Haven't seen any online, just some, tweaking does it.
Yeah, great question. I haven't seen any ability to do that all within a single request myself. Yeah, I've seen that question asked before, and there's currently not a way to do that from a single request.
So would you take that back as like feature request?
Totally. It's definitely been asked for before. Like I've seen it come through. But in the meantime, what I typically do for, like, say I have a list of 10 images, you can go through and loop through those and upload those. I would just usually try to self rate limit myself. So maybe add like a little timeout in between each upload so that you don't hit any kind of rate limiting, which could, severely impact what you're trying to do.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I think that works for now. Yeah, also to every other person listening, I think starting from today, you could start to look at the Cloud9 documentation. Kobe, you could post some links on Discord so people could, start to look at maybe sample demos, and you could start trying out, ideas and start experimenting with Cloudinary and stuff before we get into the weekend and kick off the hackathon proper.
Yes. I'll post my links as soon as I'm off here.
Yeah. All right. Without further ado, I guess I haven't seen any more questions in the chat. Thank you very much, Colby.
You're quite welcome. And again, I'm in the Discord, so let me know if you need anything.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thanks, you too.
Yeah, so that was an amazing talk we got from Kobe on how to, how to source and manage media in Jamstack applications or web applications in general, from sourcing media through, various tools and technologies, passing them through a content mesh like Uniform and rendering them with whatever cool front-end framework you choose, to managing deployments in as little as 30 seconds or even lesser on Netlify. So just, I see one question here from Fatima that says, would it be possible to provide a JSON format for images and video collections, especially in a folder on Cloudinary? I'm trying to understand the question. So are you looking for a collection of images and videos? So like a JSON file that defines a folder. If you're on Discord, like whoever asked that, maybe if you're on Discord, you could just put the question there, and Kobe could also have a look at it. He's the Cloudinary expert here. Yeah, you can ask me about technical writing. But yeah, that's a good question. Anyways, I think we did finish this quite earlier. And like I said, initially, you can start to play around with the Cloudinary API, start to look at Xata. It pays to get like this head start. I start to look at the different resources. You could start tinkering around ideas or things you could build for the hackathon, because tomorrow, yeah, we're going to get started properly. And I think for this, we can call this an evening. We would put out recordings of this so anyone can read this or can watch this after on YouTube. Also, we will try to transcribe the content into a blog post. Yeah, into a blog post, and you can read it if you're unable to watch. If you're unable to watch the videos. Anyways, have a great evening, everyone, and we'll continue conversation on Discord. Cheers.